State Historical Society. I'm at Boyd's Mason Lake Resort, whose address, excuse me, is Fifield?
Fifield.
Yeah. And today is March 10th, 1965, and we're here to talk with Mr. John Boyd and Mr. Alton Van Camp. All right. Also, here's Mr. Joe Smith of the Flambeau River State Forest Headquarters, and he may have a few comments or questions. I think we'll start off. We'll ask Mr. Boyd when he was born and when he came in this area, who his parents were, and any background information he thinks might be of some interest.
Well, I was born in '93 in Fifield.
Then you moved down here on the homestead. What year was that now?
Can't remember that. I was here before I was on the homestead.
Yeah. But it must have been right around 1900 or before when you moved down in here.
Well, I was looking over this thing here. I don't think that fellow's got the dates right. He made his trip in '89, and he said that this resort had started the year before, '98. But I know there's fireplaces here with 1898 that were built after this resort was.
Was your father the one that started this resort?
Yeah,
what was his name?
Hugh Boyd.
Hugh Boyd. And while now you think you got started here in '98?
Well, that's according to this
other fellow, yeah.
Right.
Right. Mr. Van Camp, when did you come into the area here?
Well, we moved to Park Falls when I was 1 year old. I was born in Loyal, Wisconsin in 1900. And I went to work here at Mason Lake in 1916, I think it was. I started guiding here.
You started as a guide?
Yeah. It really was a wild country then. We had no roads at all outside of just 2 ruts from here to Fifield, and tote roads wherever you went.
It was primarily logging operations, lumbering companies in the area at that time, wasn't there?
Oh yes, that's all they was doing.
Remember some of the companies that were around here? And
well, I think Mr. Boyd could answer that better. The companies that was around here, I can remember the ones that was over near home, Draper.
You remember some of the companies that operated around in here?
Smith and Hanson, and then there was the Daniel Shaw Lumber Company from Eau Claire.
Was that primarily what, pine, white pine? Is that what they were logging then, or what were they logging there?
Smith and Hanson was logging pine, but the Shaw Lumber Company was logging hardwood and hemlock.
Yeah.
Buying it for 50 cents a thousand.
50 cents a thousand. Use a little bit of that today, maybe. Was the main operations of getting the lumber out that time, was there a railroad, or was it just tote roads, or how'd they get it out?
No, logging road. They take it to the river and float it down.
Wow. When did the railroad come in here, you recall, or?
Oh, I don't know. We had an old fellow work for us here, an old Norwegian, that helped to cut the right-of-way from Ogemaw to Fifield. And he was there about 20 years.
I imagine that Sioux line must have been put in there back in around, I'd say around 1875 in there.
Yeah.
Pretty close at that time. And the northwestern branch that come through from Rice Lake to Park Falls, well, that was finished through to Park Falls in 1913. When we moved to Draper, it used to end at Kennedy then. But they finished it in 1913. And that was primarily all logging then, and that's all that track handled. See, there was a Rice Lake Lumber Company from Rice Lake, and the New Dells Lumber Company from Eau Claire was operating there then. And Hines bought Rice Lake out in 1921. Of course, from that time on, then they used railroads for logging all over. They built roads wherever they went. But the Rice Lake Lumber Company used to haul in that what we call the Overland Spur on the Thornapple River with 2 steam haulers. And every time one of those steam haulers came in, they had a train load of logs behind them. 20 sleighs with 5,000 feet on the sleigh.
This is primarily hardwood, or?
Well, both. Hardwood and hemlock.
Hemlock, huh? Oh. Remember anything about the prices back then? What are they getting for some of the lumber?
Well, pine at that time was about $3. And like I say, the Shaw Lumber Company, they were buying this hemlock 50 cents a thousand. Take their pick. And they really picked her too.
Took the biggest and the best, huh?
The biggest and the best. And it had to be sawmill timber, you know.
Yeah.
There was no such a thing as pulp those days around here.
No, it all had to be saw logs.
They didn't cut much stumpage then, did they?
Mm-hmm.
Stumpage, they didn't mess with that then, did they? They were...
No, they buy their timber tracks outright and then clean log it when they log it.
Yeah.
But in those days, a saw log, like John said, it had to be a saw log and sound. Or they wouldn't even fool.
Was they didn't practice any what we call today selective cutting back then, did they? They weren't too conservation minded, and more after the profit than anything, huh?
That was it. And the pine, what they didn't get cut, they'd send a crew in and knock it down anyway to get the tops out of sight. Sure.
Oh yes.
There was lots of that done.
You could, a few years back, you could run into places where those logs was in pretty good shape yet. You know? See maybe 10 or 15 acres that was just sawed down and left there, never touched.
They just cut the top.
Well, they cut the tree down. And
Yeah.
some places I've seen where the logs was cut up, and I suppose they didn't get a chance to skid them, they just left them. They didn't come back and fool them. And I know when I was running bulldozer for Consolidated in north of Draper, why, we run into a lot of old places where you couldn't see a sign of a building. Yet you build a road through there and you plow up box shoes and iron and a lot of different things like that.
Had
But
been a
that's-
camp.
Hmm?
It had been a
Oh
camp.
yeah, that was back in the old pine days, no doubt.
When did this lumbering operations around here kind of taper off? I mean, in terms of these companies in operation, do you recall offhand?
Well, of course, according to the old timers, you know, they figured about 30 years on the pine, and they figured the rest of it would be taken off in 30 years. And they hit her just about on the head.
Well, in fact, your big operations all through this territory here came to a close about 1936. That's when they had everything just about like your Lugerville Lumber Company. They finished about the same time Hines did over there. And they was the only two big operators left here at that time. Hines picked their steel on their railroad. I'm pretty sure it was 1936 when they pulled the track south. That was the last one.
There's the old Couillard log pine here, and they had their camps right up on this hill. That was in the old ox days.
Well,
We used to plow up ox shoes there in the garden.
What company was that? Or
By the name of Couillard. Couillard and Delore King.
Cool.
There's some of the Couillards still around up in Minnesota, I think.
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of these roads that we used years ago was part of their old logging roads,
Yeah.
like from Long Lake down to the river here. When I first went to work here, that was the only road coming in here from that way, and that was one of their old logging roads that they made years ago.
With lots of pork and beans come down through there.
Yeah, I guess so.
Joe, either one of you gentlemen ever spend any time in these camps yourselves? I mean, in terms of working?
Yes, I have, a lot of time.
Can you describe a little bit how they
Well,
lived and how they worked
yes.
during that time?
The first time I went to work in the woods, I went to work for the Rice Lake Lumber Company in what we called New Camp 7. And I stamped logs there for a while in the fall. They used to stamp each log as it was skidded in. It was all horses working there at that time. And they'd deck their logs in the fall. And then they'd haul with their horses into what we call the landing for the steam haulers. They used to have regular switches made out of ice that they hauled on just like a railroad. And they'd make up their trains and haul it in. main spur here with steam haulers. And the next winter I worked for the same company, but I was working in the cook shanty, cookee, for 225 men. But they operated more or less the same as all logging companies did at that time. I mean, they used horses instead of oxen, and they'd deck all their logs in the fall, have them all set to go, and then as soon as they got snow and got their ice roads built, they'd start hauling.
When was this?
That was in...
Around when?
Well, that was the winter of 1916 that I worked there first. And then I worked there in 1917, too.
17 you were cookee?
During the winter, yes.
Yeah. How'd they eat then? Pretty good?
Oh, yes. They had good cooks, and they had very good food.
I've heard the other men say that when the company was hiring on some men, the first thing they'd ask is, who's cooking for you?
Yeah, that's right. And that was one of the pet peeve of a lumberjack, was to beef about the grub.
Is that right?
Oh, yes. Regardless of how good it was, if he was there a while, it got bad.
What did the main diet consist of, usually?
Well, they had beef at that time, and lots of pork, too. And...
They raise this right there, or they ship it in, or how they do it?
They'd ship it in.
Any of these companies around here ever try to grow their own vegetables and stuff like that?
Yes, the Rice Lake Lumber Company had a big farm right just a little ways from Draper. They used to keep all their horses there during the summer. Oh, they must have had around 200 acres cleared up, and they raised a lot of cabbage and potatoes and stuff like that.
For use in the camps there.
Yeah, they used to call that Bundy Spur years ago, and that was one of their main places in the summer to put their stock and raise a lot of vegetables.
And they raised a lot of pigs.
Oh, yes. Well, all the camps at that time raised hogs.
Did they?
Oh, yes, they'd have, depended on the size of the crew, but some of them have as high as 40 hogs.
Who took care of them? Was that the men, or was that
That's the bull cook.
The bull cook?
Yeah.
How come they call him bull cook?
Well, he took care of the shanties. He'd done the firing in the stoves day and night. And then he'd do the chores around the cook shanty, bring in wood and see the water was in there, and also take care of the hogs. Of course, the teamsters all took care of their own horses. He didn't have to do that. But they all had a barn boss, too, that seen that everything was run right.
I've heard some funny names, you might say, applied to food. For example, I've heard people that worked in these camps called salt and gravel.
Yes.
You ever hear that?
Yes.
Do you remember any of these other funny names, you might say, that they applied to some of the food?
Some of them called the sugar sand, too. They passed the sand, and they had names for some of it that I don't think we'd better repeat here either.
Well, it won't hurt. That's
well, they called a pork sausage 4590s.
4590.
Yeah, past the 4590s. Well, they had pet names for a lot of things.
Why did they call it 4590s, or am I treading on thin ice here?
No, it's just a habit they got into, but it was pretty good sized pork sausage, and I suppose a 4590 was a big bore rifle, see?
Oh, yeah. Well, how'd they, was there any other attempts, some of these companies around in here to unionize the men so they get a better wage, better working conditions? You recall anything like that?
Yes. I remember one time up in New Dells, they came in there and tried to organize them, but I don't know, it just didn't go through. Companies, of course, all was against it, and I think most of the men figured if they joined, they'd get fired, and that's probably one reason they never got going.
Who was this that came in, you know?
No,
was it the Wobblies? The International Working Men's?
It would be, I imagine, the same group at that time.
Yeah. There's a fellow up at Hayward I know of that gave a speech not too long ago, and he talked about the Wobblies coming in and trying to unionize, and it didn't go over.
Well, they was quite active here for a few years, but they never got it to get any place.
Well, do you think the conditions of living and working were bad enough to justify a union, or were they good conditions for the time, or how would you describe it?
Well, at that time, there could have been some big improvement in their sleeping quarters, especially. They used to have a bunk shack, you know, with maybe 100 men in it, and the bunks was just built along the walls, and all you had in there was a little hay and real old rough wool blankets to sleep on. And if you didn't wash them yourself, they never got washed all winter. And you had the same condition there where the men washed. There was a big sink in the whole outfit, 3 or 4 wash dishes washed in the same place and wiped on the same towels. There could have been some improvement there.
Improvement there, yeah.
Yes.
What were the wages back then?
Well, I had worked for $13 a month in my board,
Yeah.
and $30 a month was good wages at that time. In fact, I think your average wage in the woods back in those days used to run around from $20 to $26.
Yeah.
Probably $1 a day.
Yeah. That was with board?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
that was your board furnished.
I imagine you heard a lot of interesting stories or anecdotes, you might say, that happened in these woods and these logging camps. Do you recall any that you think might be worth recording here? Funny or humorous or human interest stories, anything like that? Either one of you. Speak up freely.
Well, I can't remember too much of. A lumberjack at that time was pretty much to himself. When he got done work, he'd come in and sit down, and they didn't tell too many stories.
And when he went in the cook's shanty, he wasn't supposed to talk at the table.
Is that right?
Not only wasn't supposed to, he didn't dare to.
What was the reason behind that?
Well, because you take 200 men in the cook's shanty all talking, why, it'd be a mess. Boy, those old cooks, if you started talking, he'd take a cleaver and start right down your way.
Cook was kind of an important fellow,
Oh,
wasn't
he run that cook's shanty, you bet.
he? Yeah.
He was like old Pete, what the heck did they call him now? Crazy Pete or something. He cooked up there at the paper company. Well, Bush says, how many can you cook for, Pete? He says, I can cook for all you can call in with the horn. I used to laugh to see him walking up and down. He must have boated quite a lot because he had that boat walk, you know.
Probably was on a lot of drives.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to float a lot of logs in the rivers those days. In fact, that's the only way they moved them. Well, this is back about that time that Deach got into his big argument down here too, you know. That was the warehouser, I guess, he was arguing with.
That was on the dam business?
Yeah, on the
What's the name of that dam?
Defensive Cameron Dam.
Cameron Dam.
Cameron Dam.
See, that was only, Cameron Dam was only on a straight line about 11 miles from where I live.
Well, did Dietz own that, or who owned the dam?
Well, Deach, it was on his land. Now, who built the dam, I couldn't say.
Well, he claimed it was his.
He claimed it was his anyway, and he wanted so much 1,000 to put those logs through, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what started the argument.
They had a fight shooting down there, didn't
Oh, yes, you bet. I was only 9 years old then, but I can remember it very distinctly. And it's a funny thing, it seemed like just about everybody in this country seemed to kind of sympathize with Deach.
Yeah.
Well, that was a bad mix-up.
they? That was with Warhauser. He got.
I think the
Log.
warehouser was the one that was putting through the logs then.
Well, he finally lost that through court, didn't he?
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, he ended up in jail.
Yeah.
There was a man killed, you know, on that deal. Well, his daughter got shot, too, Deach's daughter. There's a lot to that story that never came out.
You want to bring some out?
Well, I know.
Tell us what you know about it.
I know that this Deach girl, and I think it was her brother, was coming home from winter in a buggy. And somebody took a pot shot at him out of the brush and shot her right through the stomach. But she lived through it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I don't imagine that helped his temper any either when he found that out.
No.
You know,
They never did find out who did it, whether.
well, no. But there's a lot of stories around that a bunch of deputies that was out there. I knew some of them personally. And they was all supposed to be about half liquored up, which I imagine probably there was.
Well, you were around here when they were starting to settle the area. I mean, people come in trying to raise farms and start farms and this. You remember?
Oh, yes.
That's pretty hard work.
Very
wasn't it?
distinctly. I remember when they came in down there was a whole bunch of Austrians, and I just can't remember. There was very few Scandinavians, but they all came in that country down there about the same time, 1915, 16. Boy, there was a regular land rush. All of these farms that are there today was started at that time.
Where was this? Down around where?
That's Draper and
Down Draper.
between Draper and Winter.
Yeah.
That whole country was settled about the same time.
Was this land that the lumber companies were trying to settle, or
Well,
they logged off and wanted to settle it then?
yes, a lot of it was lumber company land, and then some of these land sharks got a hold of some of it too. They used to pay some enormous prices for 40 acres at that time. I know some of them sold as high as $2,200. 90% rock.
Yeah.
That's,
Wasn't an easy life.
no, you bet it wasn't. But
They had an operation like that over at Gibba.
yes, that was.
They used to meet the immigrants at the boat in New York City and showing pictures of this model town, and there is a model town there.
It was.
Built in colonial style. Then a church and post office and store and railroad station. All beautiful white buildings.
Where was this? At
Ojibwa.
Ojibwa.
We passed through it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you didn't go through where the buildings were. You probably could see them up on
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Well, that's how that
What,
was started.
what company was that, you remember, or who was that?
I was an outfit from Eau Claire.
Foss, I think.
Foss.
Yeah.
Kelly was in on that too.
Yeah,
wasn't
there
he?
were several of them, you
No.
know. But they made quite a thing out of it, and I guess they was honest enough in their operations. People,
But
a lot of them moved in there.
but there was some misrepresentation there too.
Oh yeah.
Because a lot of these were just cut over stump fields.
They had to do all the clearing and everything when they got here.
It's mostly Polish people that came in.
Yeah.
But today there are some beautiful farms there. You must put in a lot of hard work on them. And their descendants are still there.
I had to move a lot of rock.
Yes, that's for sure.
I was going to ask you back about these logging crews. You mentioned the business about these nationalities. Was primarily the makeup of ethnic or nationality groups in these logging camps? Was there any predominant people that
Yes,
worked in the
I
log?
would say your Scandinavians were
Scandinavian.
predominant in most of the camps I worked in. Of course, you had nationalities of all kinds, but there was quite a few Scandinavians.
Well, my dad's day, why, Scandinavians had to have a camp by themselves. They
Yeah.
wouldn't even keep them in with the other crew.
Why not?
Well, they get to fighting.
They didn't like the
They didn't like them.
Scandinavians, huh?
No.
Huh. That's interesting. I've never heard that.
I heard him telling about one time him and a fellow named McBride was a blacksmith, and my dad was a wood butcher. And they sent these Swedes up on the river here to pick up some rock elm. And we're gone all day, and they come back with a big load of basswood that night. They were building sleighs, you know, and they wanted the rock elm.
Yeah, that bass would make a fine sleigh.
I heard him telling about the time they were swamped a bunch of them down on Jim Paul's, and these old timers hollered out, "Save the hats, let the Swedes drown."
Yeah.
That was a pretty wicked place there.
That big fall.
Yeah.
Telling me, I got into it one time. I run the first pitch of it, and Jim Smith's come running along the bank up above there and stopped me before I got down. I'd never been down there before, you know. We pulled the boat back up out of there with a rope.
Was that at Jim Falls?
Jim, no, not what we call Big Falls.
Big Falls.
Oh, we used to.
That's a flowage thing now.
We used to make a lot of trips from here down to Ladysmith before there ever was a dam on there, and there was a lot of wild water there then.
Did you ever do any rafting or down the rivers? Either one of you? Any of that work?
On drives, you mean?
Yeah, on drive. Yeah.
Well, no, I never did. I was too young when I was doing that. But I've done a lot of traveling on the rivers.
Well, I seen the last pine drive that went down this North Fork of the Flambeau. My dad was on there 12 springs driving.
I suppose that's Smith and Hanson.
I don't, yeah, Smith and Hanson was in on there, but there was some other outfit too, I forget. But you know, the Shaw outfit, they tried to run some birch down, floated down, and they took a strip of bark off of it, off each log, thinking that it would dry out enough to float it. But they lost most all of it. Then they put a yoke of oxen on there with an old timer. They skidded it out and put it up on the bank and left it there to dry, see, thinking they'd try it again. I don't think they ever got much of it down.
Yeah, there's been a pretty good history. I don't know if you've ever seen, either one of you seen it, pretty good history on the Daniel Shaw Lumber Company.
Is that
Some guy
so?
wrote, it's about Oh, a book about that thick.
Is that right?
All the papers of all the records and everything, most of them were kept and given to some historical society. I think we are the one that got them, either us or Minnesota. But a real good history. It tells in detail the operations of the company. And
They had a mill there at Eau Claire.
yeah, right. Tells about all their court fights and everything where they had to.
Well, right where my house sits in Loretta today, used to be a big set of loading docks, all built out of pine. And Shaw Lumber Company's the ones that used to load there. I remember when Loretta was first built, I worked when they was building those houses around there and driving team on the start, and we pulled a lot of those timbers out and hauled them over, and there was all white pine.
Yeah.
Some of them they used for wood, people around there, and a lot of them we burned up. But that dock was probably 500 feet long, and it was slanted so they could drive a team and a load of logs right up there on a sleigh, and then load them onto cars.
I remember one time Bill Charters and my dad and I drove across through there. The old man wanted to find some handier place to haul lumber rather than playfield. And we got away over there in the woods, and we met a big load of logs coming along. We didn't know just exactly where we were at. So my dad pulled off the side, and he asked this teamster how to get to Draper. Yeah, she says, I don't know, boys. I'm a new man. I'm just following this rut. Big ice road. But we finally got into Draper. Charter had bet my dad a new hat that he'd never find the place. But anyway, he got in there. All there was a boxcar, and that was a saloon set off there. That was Ryan that was in there that time.
Ryan had a spur there at that
Yeah.
time, a little short spur.
And old Coon Ryan, that was this other fellow's brother. My dad knew it. He knew both of them. And of course, Coon was there at the boxcar.
Yes, when we first came to Draper, I think there was, about 12 houses there, and 11 saloons, one hotel.
Did a lot of drinking back then.
Well, there was about 3,000 lumberjacks around there, and no place to go, you know. They did a lot of drinking, is right.
When you worked in these camps, how many days a week you worked? You worked
7 days.
7 days.
That is when I was in the cook shanty.
Yeah.
Otherwise, 6 days.
And
But that was from daylight till dark. That wasn't 8 hours a day.
Yeah, right. What in the night? What would they do at night? They go into town, would they, or they
No,
go to bed?
There was no town. A lot of those lumberjacks would come into camp in September, and they'd never leave that camp till April. There was no place to go.
You were mentioning about these saloons. I just wondered how close they were to some of these operations where they get in.
Some of the camps, of course, wasn't too far from town, but like the camp I worked in was about 12 miles. But once a lumberjack got started, he generally stayed on the job. And when he started drinking, then he didn't do nothing else.
Stayed on that job too.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, a lot of these men, they had farms usually, didn't they? I mean, and then they'd work in the woods in the winter.
Well, some of the guys that had teams there was farmers from maybe down around Chippewa Falls or somewhere. And they'd come up and work during the winter.
Yeah.
But the average lumberjack was just a drifter. A lot of them wasn't even married. Most of them wasn't. Of course, there was some that was, too.
A lot of them they called camp inspectors too.
I mean, just hit and miss, huh?
Well,
in and out.
One camp to the other, and they'd get a nice lodging, maybe and a couple of meals, and supposed to go to work the next day. But instead of that, they'd take their sack and head for another camp. But in the winter like that.
I imagine these men got put on a list, didn't they? You kind of watched out for them after a while.
They'd get wise to them if they stuck with it long enough.
I imagine they had a lot of fires back in then. Remember any incidents surrounding fires in the area here?
In fact, we had a bad one right around here, and when was that, 1935?
Yeah.
It burnt just about the whole country around here and right up into the edge of the timber, and even got into timber a little bit. And back about 1914, I think it was, we had one come through Draper. That's before Loretta ever was built. It went right over the town and right on through the other side. It came from the south. I remember we was fighting fire there for 4 or 5 days. But boy, the day that it came across there, the wind was blowing about 40 miles an hour, right out of the south in the spring of the year, just before things got green.
Was the conservation department wasn't too active in, or were they just kind of getting started?
I don't think they
protection
did.
then, weren't they?
I don't think they'd even got started at that time on fire protection.
In other words, firefighting was left to the people who lived
That's
in the
right.
area. Survival.
But it's a funny thing, back in those days, just about everybody that had any stock of any kind that lived in the country, they'd go down to these meadows on any of these creeks early in the spring, as soon as the snow got off and the grass got dry, and burn them, because they cut hay there in the fall. See? And once the fire got away, nobody paid any attention to it, just let it go.
Yeah.
We used to have lots of fires back in those days.
I think it was it the early 30s when the protection district started getting developed? Pretty much
About that time, yeah.
around in the 30s. Remember, could you generalize and say what the attitude of the people was at this time? Did they cooperate with the conservation people on this, or?
Well, I would say not too much to start in with. Of course, there's one thing, they got a law, I don't know just when it was passed anyway, that if you had a fire, and anyone that was taking care of it or who was in charge, if they met you anywhere, on the road with a car or anything else, and told you to come out and fight fire, you had to go.
Right.
And that caused a little hard feelings, I suppose, something like that, but they soon they see what good it was doing, and now they get all the cooperation in the world out of people.
The principal objection was to obtaining permits for fires more than anything else. And that's where the conservation department had to put on quite a public relations program to gain acceptance for that, because many of these people were foreign born and didn't understand why they had come to a free country like this and had to sign a permit in order to set fire on their own land. When they wanted to clean up their pastures.
Yeah, they run into a lot of trouble with that on the start.
I think many a forest ranger was run off at the point of a shot.